Saddle up, everybody. It is the Denver Broncos preview show right here on the Mainly Broncos podcast. I am your host, Cameron Parker. You guys can follow me on Twitter at Cameron Parker PO, and I am always joined by one of my good friends and, of course, one of the other hosts of the program, Matty Moles, and you guys can follow him over at Matty Moles Pod. How you doing, my man?
Yo, first NFL football Sunday is nearly completely in the books right now. While we're recording, we got the Cowboys and the Rams battling each other, but it has been a fun day. The 7 hours of commercial-free football. Oh my gosh. Oh, how I've missed you, NFL Red Zone. Oh, how I've missed you, DraftKings. Oh, how I've missed you, football. It's been way too stinking long, and it's going to go by entirely too fast, but I am very excited that football is back.
It's amazing, man. It is super, super incredible that we have finally reached that point. You and I did the AFC preview. We did the NFC preview, but we are finally here. We talked about the Broncos' expectations. We talked about some of the teams' expectations of who's coming out of both of those conferences, who's going to the playoffs, but we are finally here, and there was a bunch of action. Let's kind of get into it, do a little bit of a quick recap of what happened on Sunday's action. We'll start with you, Matty. What were some of the things, maybe the quick things that really stood out to you as far as some of this NFL action is concerned?
First of all, my division winner for the AFC South took a punch in the face by a team that I expected to be in the tank for Trevor sweepstakes. I'm talking about the Indianapolis Colts against the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Colts moved the ball very well. They weren't able to punch it in the end zone a lot, which is very surprising given their offensive line and the deficiencies defensively for the Jaguars. They lost. The Colts lost to the Jaguars 27-20. Ugh. I know Marlon Mack got hurt. He was kind of a factor early on, but that's still inexcusable. I'm sticking by it. It's a long season, but right now I'm looking like an idiot for picking the Colts to win that division.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those things that the week one kind of brings out because there's so much excitement. There's so much excitement surrounding the first initial week of the season that it's almost kind of like these probably unwarranted comments start coming out and from fans and everything, and just should we say the jump of the band, the what is it, the what is it called, Matty? When the expectation
jumping on the bandwagon,
jumping off the bandwagon early, should we say, kind of jumping off the bandwagon early, but I think that those are kind of the unfortunate things that you encounter when teams struggle right out of the gate. And at the same time, too, what did you guys expect? I mean, really? I mean, we it wasn't just us. It was the national pundits. It was some of the local podcasters as well. They've been talking about how there's the potential of rust for not just the Broncos potentially coming out on Monday night, but just the potential of like Tennessee coming out and being rusty, the potential of teams like the Indianapolis Colts coming out rusty, the teams like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers coming out and being rusty with Tom Brady right out of the gate playing the New Orleans Saints. I mean, that in essence had to be expected. And now, granted, there's been some history with the Colts and really struggling on week one, and I think too that should be expected. But that said, there were still a lot of surprises. And from two teams in particular, one's from the AFC and the NFC, that you and I have our eye on, Matty. Mine is the Cincinnati Bengals. Yours is the Arizona Cardinals. And they really put to work on the Chargers for the Bengals, and they put to work the San Francisco 49ers. But if we're being honest, there was probably not one game that was probably as impressive as the Arizona Cardinals going out and Kyler Murray, if we're being honest, backing up the MVP discussion that was talked about in the offseason with him and really backing it up and beating the NFC champion San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah, the key for them was, man, like Mostert scored early in that game. He had like a 70-something yard touchdown reception. And it looked like, man, like Garoppolo and company are going to be able to move the ball up and down the field on these guys. That didn't necessarily happen so much in the second half, and Kyler Murray was able to get loose. And really, what the biggest surprise to me was that DeAndre Hopkins was able to get 14 receptions. I just thought that defense for San Francisco was going to be able to lock down Hopkins and force guys like Christian Kirk to beat them. Kyler Murray almost had 100 yards on the ground himself. He had 91 yards rushing on 13 carries and a tutty. It was a great performance by Murray, and it was clutch performance by Murray. And you got to give credit to that Cardinals defense for locking it down in the second half. I'm not going over, I'm not super down on the Niners. They're a team that just kind of gets in these games, and occasionally one gets away from them. We'll see how they are moving into next week. But the Cardinals definitely look the part of a potential contender for that division. We got to see how they look against, say, the Seahawks, who looked really good today going against the Falcons. But I like my chances there, and I like my call. Now, you had the Bengals against the Chargers today, basically backing yourself up, and Burrow really looked the part too. So going from talking about one overall pick at the quarterback position in Kyler Murray last year to this year's Joe Burrow, the Bengals, they look like they're going to be a team that's going to be a tough out all season.
And for the Bengals, there were just probably a few things that probably got away from them. But, I mean, really, at the end of the day, you're talking about a very fluky situation with the kicker. I mean, we say sometimes, too, even with injuries, that injuries were to be expected in this type of season and this type of year with no preseason and everything else. But, man, you could not have scripted a terrible ending for that Bengals game, basically kicking what probably should have been a game-tying field goal to the Los Angeles Chargers and pulling a hamstring or a calf muscle from Randy Bullock, the kicker for the Cincinnati Bengals, on a tying field goal. You just can't script stuff like that. I mean, I will say this, it brought back a few Broncos and Bengals nightmares. One in particular was, I don't know if people remember this, I'm trying to peg the year, but the Broncos were playing the Bengals one year, and it was a very, very close game from start to finish. The Bengals scored a touchdown to make it, I believe it was 27-28, if I'm not mistaken. And on the actual extra point, the Bengals kicker muffed the field goal, or the place kicker muffed the field goal, and the Bengals ended up missing the kick from what I remember. So it kind of brought back a pretty unfortunate Bengals memory for that, but a kind of a crazy Broncos memory, for being honest. But yeah, so yeah. I just think that overall it was a very exciting time. It was very exciting NFL action. You were talking about the Cardinals earlier, and we'll get into our matchups of the day here in just a little bit. But you were talking about the Cardinals, and you were talking about the Seahawks being impressive. I want to touch a little bit on the Seahawks because, and mainly, again, just one man, Russell Wilson. Like, what does this guy have to do to win a MVP award? Like, and I mean that by, in all honesty, what does this guy have to do? The guy is an absolute magician in the football field. He understands presence in the pocket. He understands how to be efficient. He has much better weapons that he's had around him in the wide receiving core, with both Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, a guy that can finally stretch the field downfield. And then, of course, as we're alluding to, we talked about Josh Gordon coming into the mix, Maddie. I mean, Seattle's there. Really, the only thing that was potentially their holdout was that offensive line. But the one thing that is still the remaining constant, of course, Maddie, is the efficiency to which Russell Wilson operates that offense. And Wilson, if we're being honest, might end up being the most efficient quarterback of the entire league. He is so efficient. He understands how to protect the ball. He understands where his receivers are at all times. He understands when to take chances, when not to take chances. I mean, the guy is incredible. The guy is just absolutely incredible.
I mean, he's no Gardner Minshew, but that's a joke. Gardner Minshew completed like 95% of his passes today. So very, very impressive showing for him. We'll see if he's able to continue that kind of efficiency. But I definitely agree. Russell Wilson was in control of this game from start to finish. They put up 38 points, and we expected them to score on Atlanta. I was kind of hesitant to see how much Atlanta was going to be able to score on Seattle. Seattle actually does have an improved defense from a year ago. Yes, Jadeveon Clowney is gone, but in is Jamal Adams, and Jamal Adams was all over the football field today. He was playing like a man possessed, like he finally had a team that he thought he could win with, and he was just flying around making plays. So very, very welcome addition for them. And Legion of Boom 2.0 potentially going there in Seattle. But the story of the day early was Russell Wilson and Chris Carson and them being uber efficient and moving the ball. I tell you what, if Russell Wilson could play like this week in and week out, he's definitely going to be on the short list for MVP for sure. Efficiency is one thing, and being able to put in highlight reel plays is another. Making up for deficiencies on your offensive line definitely helps. The problem with him is a little bit of the gamesmanship stuff, a little bit of the statistics to back up being able to say I'm the MVP. The team should be able to support him with a strong enough record, but maybe the yards and the touchdowns aren't going to jump off the page, say like Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes. So that's kind of the standard, and you got to run the score up, kind of like you're going for the Heisman Trophy. And Russell Wilson, he doesn't necessarily do that. He doesn't get the freedom to do that in that offense. So that's why I don't think it's really a slight on him. It's just a lot of the gamesmanship and the style points aren't always there.
Yeah. Thank you guys very much for tuning in to the Mainly Broncos podcast. You guys can listen to us over on Spotify, on Spreaker, as well as iTunes. And if you guys are listening on iTunes, please leave us a review. Let us know what you think about the podcast. And if there's anything that we need to work on, and we'll make sure we can make sure that this is a better podcast for you, of course. But Maddie, let's get into obviously the big thing that we're about to talk about today, the Broncos. It is the Broncos preview show right here on the Mainly Broncos podcast. And initially, of course, I would say that coming into this game, I would probably give the hand to the Titans. If we're talking strictly just off of last year, I would say that the Titans probably had a fair shot. I mean, as far as a true fair shot to win this game. But if you're looking at it from what the Broncos did from the beginning of last year to where we sit currently today, it's like the offense went through massive like reconstructive surgery. And now they have a quarterback that has the potential to be their franchise quarterback. The expectations are what seems like pretty high for the offensive group. And to be honest with you, I think a majority of that is warranted. So let's go into the offensive matchups between the Broncos and the Tennessee Titans, Maddie. I mean, what are some things that you're wanting to watch for on the offensive side of the ball?
For us, there are several things, right? So first of all, we need to see if Courtland Sutton can do 10 jumping jacks. That's going to be question one that needs answered. You would think that dude would be able to do 10. I think it matters kind of, is he going to grimace during that, and how does he actually feel and all that stuff. But that's obviously question one. What is the health of Courtland Sutton? If he's not able to go, then up goes Patrick, up goes Deshaun Hamilton, because I don't think KJ Hamler is going to be able to go. He's actually, from all things that I've heard, he's got less of a chance to go than Courtland Sutton. So we will see. But one guy that is supposed to go, I don't want to, ever count my chickens this year, Jerry Jeudy should be making his debut in the orange and blue for us in any game, right? We haven't had a game yet. So this is our first chance to actually see him donning our jersey. They may not have a cornerback that can keep up with him down the field, right? So do you want to go real quick and talk about all of the players that the Titans are going to be missing in this game?
It's quite a lot. I mean, as far as on the defensive side of the ball, some of their key contributors who will not be there, Vic Beasley is out for this game. So that means that there will be a lot of pressure of getting to the quarterback potentially for Jadeveon Clowney as far as a debut. I mean, that's quite a lot of pressure. Now, that's not to say that for Clowney that that he could rise to the occasion. He's talented enough to do so. But as far as the secondary, their fastest player on their team, Adoree Jackson, a corner, is out for this game. And as Matty alluded to, potentially that could swing open a huge door for a player like a Jerry Jeudy, or maybe even a Tim Patrick, or just some of these other extraordinary weapons, maybe even a Noah Fant too, because one of their linebackers is also out. I believe the name is escaping me. But I mean, they took some huge hits on that defensive side. Isaiah Wilson is the biggest one on the offensive side of the ball for the Tennessee Titans. I mean, it just seems like they have just kind of hit that bug, and maybe in some ways like the Denver Broncos, as far as some of the huge bugs very late into the season. And so for the Broncos, and especially the offensive side of the ball, they have to decide, as we alluded to with the potential, the actual Von Miller injury, where do they stand? Where do the Broncos stand on this offensive side of the ball? I think with this injury of Von Miller, they have to let it loose. I would love to see Pat Shurmur and that offense really just kind of let it loose with Drew Lock. And I think that one of the surprising things to potentially look for is, okay, are we going to see some short passes for Lock? Get him some confidence early. I'm sure, like clear as day, they will want to establish the run as much as they can with guys like Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay. But I think for at least Drew Lock, and at least as far as getting a lot of chemistry early with guys like Jerry Jeudy and potentially Noah Fant early on in the season, or Albert O, or Jake Butt potentially even early on in the season, those are types of players and those are types of plays that Lock will need as far as to gain that type of confidence early on in the season. And if that can happen, and if they can actually get that type of confidence early on in the season, and especially against a pretty good defensive front and defensive team in the Titans, I think that would go a long way for that team on the offensive side of the ball. It's still pretty early, but as far as the offense and as far as what we could potentially see, I think it's pretty obvious that the offensive matchup to watch in this game will be Jerry Jeudy up against whoever's covering him. Because my guess is, Courtland Sutton, whether it was a Mr. Miyagi joke from Vic Fangio to do the 10 jumping jacks, I'm fully expecting Courtland Sutton to be in uniform and playing on Monday night. That's just my expectation. I am expecting Sutton to play. So my guess is Malcolm Butler will be tied up on Sutton all game long, is my guess. So then that means, at least probably barring packages to where Butler will be at least shadowing Jeudy on certain occasions. But who will be covering Jerry Jeudy? That's going to be the test. And Judy's going to have certainly a lot to prove, at least right out of the gate in week one. I don't know. That was one of the things we probably could have touched on in the opening, Maddie. But one of the key things too is that the young rookie wide receivers were really balling out in week one, and so this is now where we get the spotlight for Jerry Jeudy over here on the at least on Monday Night Football, to where everybody can see. Everybody can see. That means the 30 other teams can see that Jerry Jeudy potentially should have been drafted ahead of the Broncos. So this is a huge game, I think, for Jeudy to prove that I really fell into a really good situation here in Denver.
Yeah, so Jerry Jeudy is obviously the number one matchup. You mentioned Noah Fant, our first-round pick from a year ago. We all expect him to take a huge step forward. And then the other thing that the other key matchup that I really want to see, and it depends on where they line up Clowney, I really want to see how Clowney looks going up against Garett Bolles and see if Garett Bolles can actually hold his own without needing a lot of additional support, without false starts, and most certainly without holding. So other people probably are excited to see the running backs, and yeah, that's cool, and seeing what their workload's going to be. I really want to see how Garett Bolles is going to step up, regardless of who's across from him, but most likely it'll be Jadeveon Clowney, seeing how he performs in this contract year, since we did not pick up our option on him. So there's kind of where I'm looking at on the offensive side of the football. There are also, macro matchups within the game that are interesting, but that's really if Judy's 1, I really got Bolles as 2 for us.
Yeah, and of course, games are always won in the trenches, Maddie. Games are always won in the trenches. And the Broncos, and it really, if we're being honest, I mean, the game between, if we're really singling out a matchup, is between Clowney and Bolles. I mean, if we really want to say that, as far as fans or really as far as pundits, to say that Bolles is going to be taking that next step in 2020 of potentially being an elite left tackle in the NFL, he has to shut down a guy like Jadeveon Clowney. Whether Vic Beasley was going to be on that field or not, he has to shut down a elite pass rusher week in and week out, and especially in that AFC West. He's going to have to do that. That AFC West is loaded with pass rushers, with the Chargers and especially other options as well on other teams. So this is a good test, I think, right out of the gate for Bolles. So can that happen? I think that is probably, we're looking at player versus player matchups, that is probably the number one offensive matchup to watch. I think the other one, if they do end up starting out with running plays, of course, I think that how comfortable will Melvin Gordon be right out of the gate? How healthy is he truly coming out of this injury with and how much incentive is there with that chip on his shoulder to really perform at a high level and after the holdout and then you got, as we were talking too about Noah Fant, where are we standing right now with Noah Fant potentially in that matchup? Because I think that if we want to talk about a true tight end matchup, I think for me, if you want to separate yourself to be potentially a top tight end in the National Football League, you want to prove you're better than the other person. So my matchup isn't exactly a offensive versus defensive matchup. My matchup is, if you want to prove yourself to be the best, prove that you want to outplay another top tight end. And with Jonnu Smith over on the other side, and this is honestly maybe even leading a little bit too into defensive matchups as well. But, I mean, if you want to prove yourself to be the best, you have to outplay some of the best. And so for Fant, he's going to have to outplay Jonnu Smith.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of part of it. A lot of it happens to be what's within the scheme, and some game plans are going to call for Fant to be a larger part of the offensive game plan, and some are going to call for him to just kind of occupy space and help with the run game and things of that nature that aren't necessarily going to translate to a 6 reception on 8 targets for 80 yards and a touchdown type of day. That's not always going to happen week in, week out, and that's fine because we have so many other weapons now on this offense that we can get away with Fant not being that important as far as filling up the box score. But I definitely agree. He's got to be locked in. He can't have a slow start to the season like he did his rookie year. We're really going to need him to be available and to be locked in because we don't know how bad this injury is for Sutton. We don't know how long that's going to impact his game. And so having somebody that's a threat up the seam will hold the safety honest and be able to allow our other receivers to just do work on the outside on islands against other corners. So he needs to be a force enabler, force multiplier, as we call it in the military, where you do your job, and that by you doing your job allows so many other people a chance to do theirs. And that's really going to be where Fant is going to have to make his money, both passing in the passing game and in helping with run blocking as well.
So what, as far as potential matchups too, then where would you put Drew Lock potentially as a matchup then? I mean, is the matchup, maybe this is a matchup too, because if they can also prove, because Lock, one of the things that he did so well as far as the things late in that year, as we like to call Lock-Sember, right? Or Drew Sember, back when he won 4-1 the 4-1 record in Drew Sember. As I think that one of the things that was certainly standing out was he was able to get rid of the ball rather quickly. He has that quick release. So maybe that is some of the things that Denver could be looking at as far as a potential matchup and neutralizing that pass rush, because so often, and we saw it with Peyton Manning, if you can get the ball out quickly and you can release the ball quickly, then that can also help your offensive line. That can help your offensive line. We certainly saw it with Locke when he was there under center, that the offensive line did play better with Locke. So now can we see if we can get this for this game against the Titans, and with a pass rush that's going to, and it really isn't just Jadeveon Clowney, but it's also up front. And I think that maybe one particular matchup that is going to end up being maybe not talked about, or maybe it is talked about, is Jeffrey Simmons going up against Lloyd Cushenberry. This is Lloyd Cushenberry's first start as well. You have a rookie center going up on Jeffrey Simmons and that interior defensive front going up against potentially a rookie center. If they are really touting Lloyd Cushenberry to be potentially the best center coming out of the draft, and him falling to the 3rd round, I think that this is going to be a true test for him. So where is he mentally? Can he relay enough schemes and blocking as far as blocking schemes and blocking calls? I think that will be the test for Cushenberry. I think that if he can relay some of those things for Locke, I think that will put him at ease. And so really it does start up front. And so I think that for Cushenberry, maybe that's some of the things too, that as far as a matchup, where will Cushenberry be? I mean, he will have a tough test going up against that defensive line, and it's not just Jadeveon Clowney.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not worried about Cushenberry. He played really elite competition. Jeffrey Simmons being out of Mississippi State, so another SEC product. I'm not concerned at all about Cushenberry. He was the quarterback of that offensive line for Joe Burrow and company at LSU, the most prolific offense in NCAA history. Burrow was able to stay clean pretty much all season. Some of it was Burrow. Some of it can be Locke to help alleviate some of that pressure from the offensive line. But I don't have any worries about Cush. And he's got two premier guards on, he's got one on either side of him in Reisner and Graham Glasgow. So I'm not really concerned so much about Lloyd. My concern on the offensive line is on the edge and what that looks like. But you said Simmons, right? Simmons is a guy who is so good that he made Jarrell Casey expendable. Jarrell Casey is now a Denver Bronco. And he happens to get the revenge game in week 1 going against the Tennessee Titans, going on the road to Denver in the late game on Monday night. So let's switch it over to defense. What matchups are you looking at, or key matchup are you looking at on the defensive side of the ball for the Broncos?
Stopping the run, which leads to Jarrell Casey. As far as just the overall game plan and everything that they had, even when they inserted in Alexander Johnson, Alexander Johnson really proved and helped out that running game alongside of Mike Purcell. So I think that if you're looking at it from a true, and this is the overall game plan, if I'm being honest, as far as beating the Tennessee Titans, they have to stop Derrick Henry. And that was the key for them beating the Tennessee Titans last season and shutting them out 16-0 with Joe Flacco at quarterback. That was the goal. They need to stop the run and make Ryan Tannehill beat them through the air. That is the end goal here. And Ryan Tannehill certainly did quite well after that Broncos game, assuming a starting job and warranting a contract extension from the Titans. But this is also week 1 for him. And so if I'm the Broncos, they absolutely have to rely on the run. And so while everybody else wants to certainly tout that we may be seeing a lot of running potentially out of week 1, well, the Titans were doing that to begin with. So this is nothing new to them. And so I think that for the Broncos, they absolutely have to neutralize it, whether that's Jarrell Casey or whether that's the other guy that they inserted, Mike Purcell, along with Alexander Johnson. And I think that one of the other matchups, of course, is that linebacking core. How well is the communication? Alexander Johnson will receive a headset. So how well will the communication be initially right out of the gate with Alexander Johnson and defensive coordinator Ed Donatello and Vic Fangio? Where is the communication going to end up being regarding the schemes and schematics, designs, and as far as their assignments? Where exactly defensively will they stand? Because right out of the gate, that we will probably, as we alluded to early and often, there will be rust. So where exactly are the roles of the team? And with no Todd Davis in the mix, where exactly are the Broncos linebackers with their depth?
That's huge, right? So if Alexander has the headset, he's going to be responsible for getting everyone in place, not just linebackers. He's responsible for helping to get the defensive line and helping to support the defensive backs in the secondary. So that's huge. And you talk about stopping the run. You have to make sure your run fits are sound all game long. It doesn't matter if it's 3rd and 8. You got to know what your run fits are and get home. One mistake can allow Derrick Henry to get in open space and be gone. And that's the issue, right? He kind of wears you down a little bit as the game goes, and then he could pop one. Now, he didn't do that last year against us. We were one of the very few teams that had an answer for him all year, and we shut them out. I'm going to make a bold statement. I don't think we shut them out tomorrow night. Like, I think they're going to find a way to score. We have to hope that way that they score is not Derrick Henry, that way that they score is through something fluky, some type of shot, whatever, and chalk it up to just being a great play by Tannehill, getting behind our defense somehow. But if we basically force Tannehill to throw the ball 35 to 40 times in this game, I really like our chances to win. If Tannehill can get away with 28 attempts because they're feeding Derrick Henry 25 plus times, then I don't know how that's going to go for us. So getting them out of running, basically winning on first and second down, and then getting to obvious passing downs and getting off the field, getting the ball back for our offense and allowing us to put points up on the board and put pressure on them to get them out of running the football makes them operate in a way that they're not used to. So that's not their identity. Their identity is we run, we play sound defense, we'll grind it out, and we'll just beat you into submission by the fourth quarter. You can't really do that if you're down by 14 points. So I wholeheartedly agree stopping the run. I want to see I really want to see Simmons and see what our Simmons, the Simmons on our side. Yeah. The guy who hopefully is able to get that contract situation figured out after the season's done. I really want to see what he does for sure. But outside of the running game, the real matchup that I care about is A.J. Brown versus Bouier. So
Bouier.
Booyah. It's going to be really interesting to see. Gone is Chris Harris Jr. He's gone. He's in Los Angeles right now. He's playing on a team that scored 16 points and got a win today. So, yeah, you went to a whole better situation there, right? Be very interesting. So maybe if stopping Henry is priority 1, definitely high priority 2 is stopping A.J. Brown from killing us.
Yeah, I think the secondary is going to be one of those other things. And we touched on it earlier as far as a matchup regarding tight end and tight end, for Noah Fant and playing better than the other tight end. That's the other wild card matchup of all of this. We know where historically the Broncos defense has been in covering tight ends. It's not been great, fellas. It's not been great in covering those tight ends. So where is this Broncos defense right out of the gate covering a guy like a Jonnu Smith? If Bouier is shutting down A.J. Brown, then that leaves open another target for Ryan Tannehill, and that's Jonnu Smith. And we all know, whether it's Drew Lock or anybody else that's in the NFL, a quarterback's best friend, aside from a running game and a number one wide receiver, is that safety blanket over the middle, or that safety blanket at tight end. A guy that can be so reliable that he can trust him no matter what. And for Jonnu Smith, the Broncos have to figure out something there, whether that's, putting, Bouier there at times, maybe schematically, or what they'll do, putting Alexander Johnson on him. I don't know. I don't exactly know where that would lead, but I think that this is where the Justin Sternad injury might end up looming large. And I think that defensively, that if it's not stopping the run, and they do end up locking AJ and Bouier ends up locking down AJ Brown, if AJ locks down the other AJ, then that will just only leave the door open for Smith. And historically, that's an area where we absolutely have to work on. So hopefully the injury of Justin Strnad doesn't loom large here on Monday night.
Absolutely. I don't really have anything to add there. Covering the tight end has always kind of been the thing that's been a thorn in our side. But one thing I really don't want to have happen is us not being able to cover the tight end alongside not being able to cover the other team's number one wide receiver, who gets incredible separation and basically makes the defensive back have a very, very small margin for error. So I don't, if we kind of know where it's going, we can bracket it, we can do other things, but you got to be able to stop the bleeding in some places and just give the offense something. This is an offensive league after all. They do want points to be scored, but not letting them go willy-nilly. Maybe the Strnad thing, maybe Strnad would have been able to be key in helping to mitigate Jonnu Smith, but I'm not overly concerned that Jonnu Smith's going to be the one to beat us. If we lose, it's not going to be because of Smith. It's going to be because we didn't handle business putting Henry on the ground or keeping A.J. Brown in check.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly where it's going to be. It may not. I mean, and it's not a detriment to throwing Smith's talent under the bus at all, because Smith is a really good tight end. But when you have a really good defensive coordinator like Vic Fangio, that's really where it does fall. Is that it's that we really killed ourselves where it mattered. I mean, that's really where it's going to just fall down to. If we didn't cover a tight end or as far as there was some miscommunication potentially, that's exactly where it would fall. And it on tape, it could look that, that maybe this Justin Strnad injury, we do miss him. But yeah, I agree with you, Maddie, 100%. Moving on to our team predictions, Maddie. This is where, and also what we'll do at the very end of this is we'll do a final score of the game between the Broncos and the Titans. But team predictions, Maddie, if we're going to go up and down this team and it's probably one of the things we could have wrapped up into our expectations thing, but now with it being week 1 and our season finally here, where are we in terms of who will be the offensive player of the year, who will be the rookie of the year on the team, who will be the defensive player of the year, who will be the biggest surprise, who will be a player that is the dark horse MVP of the entire team?
So this team's going to come and go and click with Drew Lock. If Drew Lock steps up to the plate and is everything that we think and hope that he will be, then he's most certainly the captain of the team, even though I think they're going to be doing that week in and week out. I think he's going to be wearing the C on his chest more than anyone, especially with Vaughn being out. So it's going to be Drew Lock being the MVP. The rookie of the year for us, obviously, I think is going to be Jerry Jeudy. He's our number 1 overall pick. He's the one that's going to be able to have the largest impact. It kind of goes hand in hand with Drew Lock, and even more so potentially week 1 with Courtland Sutton being out. So there's that. Our defensive player of the year, I know that it could be easy to say Simmons for sure, but it's going to have to be Bradley Chubb. Bradley Chubb, if we're going to have any type of success, it's going to have to be Bradley Chubb and his double-digit sacks. It's just going to have to be. Sorry, kid. You're the number 5 overall pick. You were arguably the number 1 overall pick for a large portion of that season going into the draft. It's time, man. Vaughn's gone. We might get you some support after this week's done. Who knows what happens with Cameron Wake and Clay Matthews if we recircle those wagons again, who knows, but it's on you, Bradley Chubb. So I think he has to be and he will be our defensive MVP. If you talk about dark horse contributors, I really like looking at the cornerback position. So whoever it is that ends up really being the corner number 2, I mean, I already touched on the guy that's going to make or break our team, the second most outside of Locke, and that's going to be Garett Bolles, right? Garett Bolles falls apart. If we have a leak on the left side, we're going to be in trouble. But I also don't want to leak on the opposite corner spot from Bouier, and a place where quarterbacks can just attack and attack and attack, right? Roby couldn't really step up to the plate and hold that spot down. We've had numerous other corners. Yadam, the latest victim there. So whoever it is holding that spot, whether it's Ojemudia or if it's Duke Dawson, maybe out there on that side, whoever that is, that's our corner number 2, and I'll be able to see legitimately what that is tomorrow night. That's going to be really the key, because I think Bouier is going to be able to be good enough. But do we have that other vulnerability where this is a league where there are all kinds of wide receivers that can kill you, and you can scheme things to help your slot corner out. You can't scheme a whole lot to help that wide receiver 2, cornerback 2. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. Dark horse. And maybe somebody can make themselves a lot of money by being very effective for us on defense on the opposite side.
Yeah. So for Matty, on the offensive player of the year as well as MVP, he has Drew Lock. And I think that it's pretty evident that is the go hand in hand. That's going to end up being my prediction as well. That Drew Lock, he will end up being the MVP offensive player there, just because he's going to go as far as that team goes offensively. I mean, where is he at? I mean, this is also his rookie season, if we're being honest. So despite all the expectations and us talking about it, we should still at least understand that it's his rookie year, and we can't exactly, expect him to light it up for 38 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. I mean, if he throws it for 38 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, you're looking at a guy that's going to be placing himself like dead central in that MVP voting at the end of the year. So we can't exactly predict that, but he is the offensive player of the year, the offensive MVP, the team MVP, if we're looking at team predictions. Jerry Jeudy, I do believe will end up being the rookie of the year. And obviously it's not a slight against the wide receiver number 1, but a few years from now, we may end up looking at it from the standpoint that Jerry Jeudy may end up being a more valuable wide, like the Broncos may have drafted, should we say, two legitimate number 1 wide receivers in Cortland Sutton the year they drafted him, and then Jerry Jeudy the year they drafted him this year. And it is not too often you get a wide receiver that has come into this league and been this refined of tools and really looked the part. I mean, guys like Amari Cooper and Calvin Ridley have come out pretty refined, but to tout it really ever since high school and to have pros actually come out and ask you personally for questions and tips of being a great route runner, what to do better, that's only touching the surface of the greatness of Jerry Jeudy. And so I believe that Jerry Jeudy is there for the offensive rookie of the year, or should we say the rookie of the year. Defensive player of the year, Matty went with Bradley Chubb. I will go a step further, or not a step further, but I will choose a different person. I will go with Justin Simmons, just because the contract season and everything else. This is his second full season. Not that this is a second full season with everybody else, defensively, offensively with Vic Fangio, but this is his second full season with a defensive-minded head coach, one that he loves. He loves this scheme. Simmons, he speaks so glowingly about this system that you're looking at it from the standpoint defensively that Alexander Johnson may end up being the quarterback of calls and everything else. Well, if we're being honest, the quarterbacks of the defense are really Justin Simmons and Alexander Johnson. Really, people that, as far as who Fangio trusts, and for Simmons, it's going to be interesting. Are we going to see some of that high safety look again? Because athleticism and everything else with Simmons, it's right there. You have a guy that can man that back side of the secondary just by himself, and use speed and that athleticism and instincts and everything else to really use his eyes and get after the ball and make tackles and potentially even cover extremely well. And maybe that's where Justin Simmons ends up lining up with a Jonnu Smith potentially, as far as his athleticism. I think that's going to be pretty interesting come this Monday night. But Justin Simmons, I think, will be the defensive player of the year. I do think the Broncos do come to terms with a contract extension, but I believe that the franchise tag, much like this year, I believe the franchise tag is still waiting there, and a backup option. But so I think Justin Simmons is that guy. As far as a dark horse contributor, as much as I would like to go cornerback with Michael Ojemudia, or maybe a Bryce Callahan, I believe that a dark horse contributor is Jake Butt.
Interesting.
And I just say that just because he's got that mental toughness, man. There's just something about him. There's something about Butt this year where it's just there for him. And it's always been there for Butt mentally. But I just think that when you go back, and while it was just 3 games, I believe that there's just something with him. He understands a presence of being on a football field, whether it's third down, whether it's in a key moment of a game where Locke will need to hit someone that's not Noah Fant or potentially Albert O if he ends up becoming a dark horse. I think that Jake Butt is the dark horse contributor for this team. And I'll throw a surprise in here as far as a defensive dark horse contributor, even though he may not be a dark horse now due to the injury. Malik Reed.
Yeah, he's going to have to be huge.
I will say that Malik Reed is one of those guys that we're going to be relying heavily on. And if you want to make a statement, if we're talking about a statement, a very early on statement to the Broncos and to potential free agents they may be bringing in, you want to make a statement that you don't want them to bring in a Clay Matthews or a Terrell Suggs or a Cameron Wake. Do you want to make that statement? Go out there and ball out on Monday night. Go show them that you can be the player that you've been ever since you've been on the Broncos, as far as making the 53-man roster and really proving that you belong in this league. Go out and show it, because now this is your time, man. This is your time. So let's go out, ball out, and really rise to the occasion with the new opportunity that's arose for you with the Von Miller injury.
Yeah, for sure. I like the pick. I think it's smart. There's a lot of opportunity there, so you got to have opportunity if you're going to make an impact. You have to be on the field if you're going to make an impact. So the Reed pick is very smart. That's a sharp way of looking at it. I kind of wish that I would have gone that way, but I still stand by my cornerback too, whoever that ends up being. All right, so we've kind of talked around the offense and the defensive matchups. Quick recap for the AFC West. The Chiefs beat the Texans on Thursday night. The Raiders ended up getting a win over the Carolina Panthers, and the Chargers eked out a victory over the Cincinnati Bengals. So the entire AFC West is 1-0 going into this game. Let's see if the Broncos can keep pace. Let's make our predictions. What do you think happens in this game? What do you think is the final score?
I'll tell you right now, it's not going to end up being like that ESPN article that apparently put out that the Titans are going to win by double digits. Titans
27-14. What was that?
I mean, they may not. The Broncos may not win the game, but I will tell you, it's going to be a lot closer than a 27-14 matchup. I have publicly said that I do think that the Denver Broncos will win that Week 1 matchup. I'm going to stand by that. Over the course of the Denver Broncos history, I did some research on this. The Broncos are 40-20 in opening day games. Now, it certainly has not been the best lately in the last 2 seasons, really. But overall, I mean, the Broncos are 40-20 in opening day games. The Dallas Cowboys are 39-21. The Packers are 57-39. The Chicago Bears, who won today, surprisingly, have a record of 54-41, and the Giants have a record of 50-41.
That's pretty good. And when Denver has opening day at home, they tend to be really, really good. How many years in a row have we won our home opener?
Well, it's not been. That's the one part where I did not end up looking. But I mean, as far as the last few seasons, it's worth noting that the 40-20 record does include the years after Manning.
So that's pretty. We're pretty nails at home when we open up the season. I think that continues. What's your final score? What did you end up saying it would be?
So I will say that the final score will end up being. I will say that it is 27-20 Denver.
I'm going 23-20 Denver, and Brandon McManus hits the game-winning field goal, and then gives you the Johnny football.
Please no.
Money sign after he hits it. He's like, "Yeah, you signed me to that extension. That's why I'm getting paid, but that's why I'm making my $4 million a year." So all you haters can do whatever. I'm not going to say that on radio, but that he'll show why we gave him that extension, and then everybody's going to be like, "Yay, I love you, Brandon McManus. You're awesome."
Brandon McMoney.
Brandon McMoney. Exactly. So I think 23-20, and that gets us going to a 1-0 start.
All right. So that will wrap up the Denver Broncos preview show, which has been a recap of the Sunday action and talking a little bit about the offensive and defensive matchups along with the team predictions. And along with those team predictions, we did our team MVP, our team rookie of the year and defensive player of the year, and talked about dark horse contributors. And it was a fascinating show. And then at the end of it, we did our final score. Again, to recap that particular portion, I said 27-20 Broncos. Maddie said 23-20 Broncos over the Tennessee Titans. Let's do this, Broncos country. We're gonna do this. The Broncos are gonna come out on top against the Tennessee Titans. And also, it's worth noting too, both Maddie and I, we're gonna get you guys covered with the post-game recap of this Tennessee Titans and the Denver Broncos matchup after the Monday night game is over with. So we're gonna make sure that the post-game recap is available for you guys right out of the gate after that post-game recap. So thank you guys very much for listening to the Mainly Broncos podcast. You guys can tune into that podcast over on Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, or really any. I haven't done any research really, but I mean, you could probably search the Mainly Broncos podcast anywhere. Probably, I don't know, but anyway, thank you guys very much for listening to this episode of the Mainly Broncos podcast. Settle up with us, everybody, because this is the very first Broncos preview show of 2020, Maddie.
Let's go.